In this lesson, we'll cover placing beams. So looking at our three-dimensional model, we actually see we have some beams placed from column to column and also from column to walls. In the lower right, we have a few columns and walls that currently do not have beams. So to place our beams, let's first go to a floor plan. The floor plan for these beams will be the O2 floor. So in the project browser on the left, open O2 floor. Then zoom in around the bottom right. Now from here, we could see beams are placed from column to column and column to wall, but we also have beams placed from a column, but they don't connect to a wall. So we're going to look at two different techniques of placing beams. One will be drawing lines, or just drawing a singular beam. For example, this one where my mouse is at. We'll create one off of this column and one off of this column. The beam type we'll create is a 400 by 800 millimeter concrete beam. So to start the beam command, let's go to the Structure tab. On the Structure tab, click Beam. First thing I want to do on the left in the property area is select the beam that I want to use. And you can see there's a variety of different types of beams loaded in this project. If the beam type you want is not loaded, simply click Load Family in the upper right. For this example though, let's choose the 400 by 800 concrete rectangular beam. Next, in the draw area on the left, I'm going to simply choose the line tool, because the points I click will define the beam length. I'm going to zoom in, I'll hover over the center of the column, pick it, drag my mouse up to about 2900 millimeters, and click again. This will draw a beam segment in the length of 2900 millimeters. To end the command, simply click Modify. To view this information of the beam, click the beam, and then in the property area on the left, I could see the elements of the beam. For example, if there were any offsets, the origin justification, its material class, and other structural criteria or parameters used for this beam. In the upper right, I have a variety of tools as well for my placement, also for the work plane and any justification edits I'd like to make. To deselect, click in the background. Now, another method to placing our beams is actually to use the existing grids. So let's start the beam tool again. Click Beam. Verify the 400 by 800 beam type is selected. Then on the right side of the actual ribbon, click On Grids. Revit will now ask you to place your beams on the grids. Now, the rules that Revit uses when placing beams in this manner is to place a beam segment between columns, columns and walls, or walls. You can also tag these elements on placement by choosing Tag on Placement or tag them after the fact. Let's not tag these. So all I have to do is simply start to select a grid. I can hover over grid, and if it's between two columns, the actual beam is just created between the two columns. Now hold the Control key down to add more. Select another grid. Again, the beam is created between the columns. And I can select another one. Let's say this horizontal. Here, I could see it actually recognized there's multiple segments of actual beams to create, so it created those. Likewise for this horizontal grid line. Lastly, click Finish to accept these beams. Now, each of these beams are drawn in segments. If you're still within the beam command, click Modify. And if there's a beam you wouldn't want, you can simply select it, such as this one on the right, and click Delete to remove it. And I could do the same thing on the lower portion, select the beam and delete to remove it. Now let's create one more beam above the column to where my mouse is at. So again, I'm going to start the Beam command. Now one thing to note is the options bar. On the options bar, you have the associated level for the beam. You also have the actual structural usage of how we're actually using this here in this manner. You can also snap to 3D if we're in 3D or make chains of beams. For now though, let's just use the linear line method of creating a beam and choose the Tag on Placement. So once again, let's click in the middle of a column, drag up to about 2900 millimeters and click. To end the command, click Modify, and we've placed the beam, including its tag. Now, one thing you may want to create or need to create is a beam that's curved. It's really created in the same manner, just using a different line tool. So let's start beam again. In the draw panel, let's choose our 3-point arc, start and radius. Deselect tag on placement. And to start my beam, I'm simply going to move over one of my existing beams, and the location doesn't matter for this example. I'll click, drag my mouse to the end position of the beam, let's say on another grid line, click, and then come back in between to produce the actual radius of this actual beam. And click again. Click Modify to end the command. Now, based on settings and justification, the beams will clean up depending on, again, the type of beam and the material used. To view this now in 3D, close the view, and you can see the beams we just added drawn in 3D. So as a review, in this lesson, we looked at placing beams. We used the beam command to place beams in 3 different methods. 1, to draw lines, basically point to point, drawing our beam in a given length. 2, we actually created beams by selecting grid lines. The beams are created between columns and walls within those grid segments. And then lastly, we looked at creating a curved beam, using basically the draw technique, but using an arc as the path for the beam to be created.